Get ready. You're about to enter the Remso Republic.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another episode of what I'm hoping your favorite podcast is in the sea of never-ending shows and entertainment, the Remso Republic. I'm your host, as always, Remso W. Martinez, the namesake, the founder, everything you want. Speaking of which, that movie, The Founder, with Michael Keaton, if you have seen it, go onto our private Facebook group, the Remso Republic Nation, and let me know how that is, because it's got two of my favorite actors. It's got Michael Keaton, it's got Nick Offerman, who plays Ron Swanson from Parks and Recreation. It's about McDonald's, and everyone loves that. I might not get to see it for a little while, so if you have, totally come out and spoil that movie for me. But before I get too sidetracked, let's talk about something else for a little bit. This is a weird time in American history for many reasons. And what I like to do is I like to actually, watch like an evolution of something while kind of just, being an outsider looking in. And when it came to conservative politics the past decade, what we saw between the Bush administration, the latter end of the Bush administration, to where we are right now, we have seen something pretty incredible happen. We saw, the compassionate conservatives, the K6 of the world, and everyone like that transform into like this Ron Paul Tea Party movement. We saw, the Romney side of things in 2012. We had like this libertarian surge post 2012, and now it's just now I can't really tell what it is. I mean, there are things about the current administration I do kind of like. There are some things that I am kind of worried about, but with the left, it seems that they pretty much, I don't want to say the same, but they've been pretty consistent with everything the past, I want to say 17 years or so. They've been pretty consistent about where they stand on things. If anything, they went a little bit farther to the left, but they were already extremely leftist in their ideology to begin with. It was only the application in which they were trying to figure things out. But when you look at how conservatives have tended to interact with things the past decade or so, I remember when taxes used to be a giant issue. And even in the Republican primaries in 2016, it seemed like something people cared about. I mean, every day online, I see libertarians throwing around the taxation as theft meme, but that's as far as it goes. I'm not really hearing any substantial talk. I mean, just when I go and I talk to some of my my more die-in-the-wool Republican friends, they're very, they don't necessarily know what a flat tax is. They don't necessarily know what a consumption tax is. They don't necessarily even really care about taxes anymore. They're more, they're in that honeymoon phase with the new administration, with the new Republican government right now. But before I go any further, I want to go ahead and introduce a very old friend of the show. Many of you remember him from Season 1. He's the Director of Research from Free the People, my good friend Logan Albright. Logan, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Remso. How are you?
Man, I am awesome. But I am curious, do Republicans give a crap about tax reform anymore?
I think they do. I think we've always cared about tax reform. I think a lot of what you're seeing is probably everyone's chasing after the millennial crowd right now, and people are looking to try to get them interested and them engaged in politics. And millennials are young by definition, and they haven't made very much money yet, and they haven't started paying very much in taxes yet. So I think it's a more difficult issue to get them excited about. So a lot of people tend to be focusing on the civil liberties issues and the other things that millennials care more about, because you got to get those members up. You got to capture the young people if you want to run an organization. And all the research shows that people do start caring a lot more about taxes when they get older. So I'm optimistic in that front. And I'm also optimistic that I think the Trump administration has made tax reform a major plank of what they want to get done early on, which would be pretty nice.
Yeah, definitely. And, if we were to just look at this one issue alone, it seems that, very early on, and even 2015 when Ted Cruz and Rand Paul and Rubio were one of the first couple guys to enter the field, I mean, it seems like Republicans really wanted a very, limited government, a very conservative type of guy. And I just thought that taxes went with that. When you look at the beginning of the Tea Party, which was really an offshot of the Ron Paul campaign in 2008, it was all about taxes. It was all about the debt and spending and things like that. And with Ron Paul, he wanted, what was it, a 14.9% flat tax. Ted Cruz tried to go a little bit lower than that. And when you look at people like Gary Johnson, he wanted, a consumption tax, which would eliminate the current tax code and things like that. With Trump, I don't necessarily know. I mean, it's either I'm ignorant or I just don't necessarily understand it, but what's the Trump campaign trying to do with tax reform? Do they even care about it? Because all I see is we're going to spend on this and we're going to spend on that and we're going to increase this and we're going to increase that. When do I get to start saving some of my money with this new Republican administration?
Well, I hope that he actually follows through on what he said during the campaign and what he's posted on his campaign website, which is and he has it on his whitehouse.gov now as of yesterday. They do have a tax reform plan that they have been pushing. It's certainly not as radical or conservative as like a completely flat tax or a consumption tax, but he flattens the current tax code down to 3 tax brackets, all of which are lower than the current ones. It would eliminate the death tax. It would lower the corporate income tax, which is currently the highest in the world. So it does a lot of pretty good conservative things that would save us all a lot of money. If they actually pull through with it. I mean, they've got both houses of Congress now. They've got Paul Ryan as Speaker of the House. So who knows if they can actually act on it. I'm not confident that the Republicans can actually get anything done based on past experience. But if they do push forward on that, which they say they're going to do, it could have some pretty positive results for us.
Definitely. And I mean, I will, in Virginia, in this previous election, we had 2 major state amendments on the ballot. One of them was for the state to be a right-to-work state, for it to actually be ingrained in our Constitution here in the state. And the other one would essentially allow, property tax breaks for the widows of soldiers and first responders and stuff like that. And a large number of my conservative and libertarian friends voted no on that one because their big argument was it creates a special class of people. But for me, my concept was I will vote for anything and everything that creates some type of tax break so people of any, for any reason could keep more of their own money. But, just let's do that, that wonderful classic thing that libertarians do. Let's talk about just a crazy hypothetical situation. If, let's say, this new Republican administration really wanted to do something just completely radical with the tax code. I have some friends that have been bugging me about this recently. It's like they're trying, and these are the ones that actually understand, tax laws and things like that. They're saying, I want a consumption tax. And I have the other side that says I want a flat tax. What are the differences between the two? And, which one in your mind would probably be the most practical if we ever got to that point?
Well, it's a kind of a debate that splits a lot of libertarians and conservatives, as you say. I think the consumption tax, which would be basically a national sales tax on anything you buy in replacing the income tax, I think the consumption tax makes more sense in theory, but I think in practice it would probably end up leading to more taxes on everybody, and I think the flat tax makes more sense as a practical measure. And the reason I think that is that's what we've seen in places like Europe where they have a VAT tax, a consumption tax, at the same time as they also have income taxes. So while the initial pitch may be, yeah, we're going to put just a consumption tax and no income tax, I don't trust the government to withhold the income tax and not sneakily somehow kind of impose it again. And then you end up in a situation where you're being taxed coming and going. You're being taxed as you earn the money and as you spend the money. So in that sense, I'm worried that a consumption tax would lead to more taxes. The reason I think it's better in theory is that it encourages saving, which saving is the driver of economic growth. So I think that would be good. It's more visible, a consumption tax. It's better. I like the way that our country does it versus the countries in Europe where you don't include the tax built into the price. You see it as an additional add-on once you check out. I think that makes taxes more visible and it makes people aware of them more and more resistant to raising them. So I think that's good. And also, I just don't think you should be taxed for earning money. Earning money is a good thing. Being taxed for spending money makes more sense to me in theory. But again, I think it would lead to more taxes overall based on the way our government does things. So I'd prefer a flat tax.
Sounds about right. No, I pretty much agree with you on that. We're going to go ahead and continue this conversation, Logan. But first, we're going to go ahead and hit our first commercial break. Folks, you're listening to the Remso Republic with our special guest, Logan Albright. Hang on tight. We'll be right back in a moment.
The voice of the Liberty Generation, Remso W. Martinez.
Take the show on the go by subscribing to the Remso Republic on iTunes, SoundCloud, Stitcher, TuneIn, Google Play, and YouTube. Don't be left out.
make sure to visit libertarianwingmedia.com, where you can find articles written by libertarians all over the world on all of today's issues. Check out our podcast network with monthly and weekly podcasts. Check out our Libertarian t-shirt store with t-shirts like Make Markets Free Again and Make Markets Not War. And you too can become an author at Libertarian Wing Media and write what you want when you want. Just email alexmerced@alexmerced.com. Thank you very much.
What are they teaching our children these days? How can so many young people graduate and become socialists? Do they even know what socialism is? Kids are learning how to preserve the environment, but are they learning how to preserve their own liberty? How about introducing your children to, I don't know, these fundamental principles that helped create the greatest, most prosperous nation in the world? I don't know about you, but when I become a parent, I'm going to read my kids The Chronicles of Kibblestan by Andrea Rand. A little bit of Narnia, a little bit of Atlas Shrugged. Kids are loving this exciting saga about a fantastical land's struggle to be free. Filled with humor and suspense, Kibblestan is a treat for any kid, or even adults. I mean, I enjoyed reading it. It's for anyone that enjoys reading fantasy. But also, it has the added bonus of introducing some basic principles of liberty as it constantly ponders the question, what does it take for a land to stay free? There's even questions at the end of each book to facilitate conversation with your children, including a student group or a book club. The Chronicles of Kibblestan by Andrea Rand is currently available on Amazon.com, or you can visit www.kibblestan.com. Liberty is worth preserving. Are you in? Folks, welcome back to the program. We're going to continue our conversation on taxes. So we both kind of came to the conclusion. I agree with you entirely. I think a flat tax is, much more realistic than a consumption tax. But there's some folks that are listening right now. They're like, why the hell are they having this conversation? Isn't taxation theft? So let's try and like flesh this out a little bit. Logan, is taxation theft?
Of course it is. And you didn't let me finish before. When I said I want a flat tax, I didn't mention that the rate I want for the flat tax is 0%.
Oh my gosh, it's refreshing to hear that. Often here, I mean, I'm Ryan and I are some of the lone libertarians on campus that when we say that taxation is theft, even our most strong and strident constitutionalist friends will look at us and they're like, what the hell do you mean by that? And it comes back to this principle, and let me know if you agree or not, but if something is good, if an idea is good, it does not require force. If people want something, they will usually voluntarily come together and get things done. And at any point when anything has to be enforced by gunpoint, what is it? I mean, if the Crips were to come over to my house and say, hey, you got to give us payer protection money or else we'll shoot you, and you pay them, what just happened? You didn't willingly give it to them. I mean, yeah, you willingly chose not to get shot, but it's theft. What is the difference between the government and any other type of gang? It's the fact that one has more legitimacy. Why do you think that's such a disconnect for people to understand? Because the logic is there. There are so many abundant examples that it's there. But there's this idea that it's owed. And if it is owed, what does that make us? It makes us slaves. I mean, where do you think is the disconnect between libertarians and conservatives when we say that taxation is theft?
I think people tend to speak in generalities a lot, and they use high-minded sounding phrases that don't actually mean anything, like, oh, we have an obligation to support society, or, this is for the good of the many and things like that. But what it actually is one person taking another person's money and doing what they want with it. And maybe what they want to do with it is good and noble, and maybe it's not. But if you or I were to go to our neighbor's house and say, you're going to give me all this money and I'm going to build a library with it, and if you don't, I'll put you in prison, that would be a crime. That would be theft. It would be extortion. It would be very much illegal. the government gets away with it because the government has a monopoly on force, and they've somehow managed to confer legitimacy on themselves where people think that it's not a crime. But if you always think about things in terms of if an individual is doing this, if I was doing it, if someone else was doing it, would it be morally right? Would it be wrong? That, I think, gives a lot of clarity to your thinking. And when you speak in these very vague terms, generalities about our duty to society, what is society? Ayn Rand famously said there's no such thing as society. It's just a collection of individuals. I think if you think in those terms, it fosters clear thinking and it makes it easier to understand these kind of concepts.
Exactly. And, when I try and have this conversation with people, they either try and they try and do one of three things. They either completely shut me off and try and change the conversation or leave the conversation. They try and convince me that I'm wrong, or they let me listen. And I've seen that the people that, will actually listen to me, the people that try and convince me, they open up so many opportunities to just disprove what they think. And I can usually tell the people that, they've got those gears turning in their head. You can tell that they're starting to agree with me. But they've just been, they've spent so many years being told that life is one way and it's just like this. They just can't do that because from there it shatters their entire worldview. I mean, when you take it back to this, when you take it back to, this is no different than that. Violence still has to be the force applied to the situation. It really bothers me that people still don't understand that. And, it comes back to what I said earlier. If we live to serve the state, are we slaves or are we free?
Yeah, I think that it's very frustrating for me because as most people in America, you're brought up to a certain way, you believe certain things, and most people just never question it. They take it on faith, they accept it. And there's so many things that I am contrarian about, as you know, that I run up against people all these times. Like, for example, my education was unconventional. I was homeschooled, or I was rather unschooled, which is something people aren't familiar with. And you try to explain that to people what that is, and they think, well, you have to go to school to get an education. There's no other way to do it. It's impossible because that's what they've been brought up to believe, and they've never questioned it. It's the same thing with government, like the famous libertarian meme, who will build the roads? People think, well, if the government doesn't build the roads, no one will because the government builds the roads. But you can easily imagine a world where government doesn't do that because there's already private roads that aren't built by the government. It's not hard at all. But people just don't want to be shaken out of their views that they've held for their entire lives. And it's really difficult to get them to think that way. And that's the same way with taxation. People just accept that taxation is the price you pay for being a citizen, and they don't think about what it really is. And I think they fall into circular reasoning as well. Like, I have a lot of arguments with people where they say, well, you have implicitly agreed to the social contract of taxation by living on the government's land. Like, I don't live on the government's land. The government doesn't own the land that I live on, but people assume that the United States of America owns all the land in the United States of America, which is a circular argument because how did they get the land? They must have stolen it the same way they stole the money that comes from taxation. So I think it's really difficult to get people to think in those terms.
Yeah, I mean, besides, I'm so fucking tired of hearing about that fucking social contract. Where is it? I didn't sign it. Even if I would have signed it, I probably would read it and contest certain things. But Logan, we're going to go ahead and talk about those, those roads which only exist because of the government. But first, we're going to go ahead and hit our final commercial break. Folks, learn about where those freaking roads come from right after this commercial break.
We'll be back shortly.
Stay up to date with the latest news and updates by visiting
RemzoRepublic.com.
Make sure to subscribe to all the podcasts on the Libertarian Wing Media Podcast Network on Google Play, iTunes, and Stitcher, such as the Alex Merced Cast, with interesting interviews with interesting people every week. Breaking Progressives, spending time every week breaking down left-wing narratives and showing what's real and what's fake. Economics Why Not? A weekly look at economics and applying economic principles to daily life. Better Today, a weekly podcast where we take a look on ways to improve your life and be better today. Libertarian Comments is a podcast where we play audio from the video archives of Alex Merced from his videos dating back to 2008. Liberty Public Access, a podcast where anyone can submit an episode. Submit your episodes to Alex Merced at alexmerced.com. Have you been wanting to start your own podcast? Then subscribe to Podcast and Blogging Tips and Tricks, a weekly podcast about how to host your podcast, how to produce your podcast, and how to market your podcast. We'll be adding some monthly podcasts to the lineup soon, including Make Markets Free Again, a monthly look at what's going on in markets and regulation all over the world, and the Free VST podcast, looking at free VST instruments for electronic music producers. Listen to these podcasts by going to libertarianwingmedia.com or subscribing on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play. And if you enjoy the podcast, tell your friends and leave a positive review on iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play.
Okay, everyone, we're going to start wrapping up soon. Logan, okay, this is the regular statist argument. And let's kind of backtrack a little bit. Without government, who would build the freaking roads?
The answer is very simple. Anybody who wanted to go anywhere. Or anybody who wanted you to go anywhere. You know, I like to use analogies of things like, you know, parking lots or shopping malls or office buildings. You know, these are big infrastructure expenses that cost a lot of money. Government doesn't build them. Private citizens build them. And you don't, you know, it's not like every person who uses a kiosk in a mall has to pay for the entire mall. Someone puts out the capital, pays for the whole thing, and then rents it out to the people who want to use it. You think if there's a Walmart in the middle of nowhere and there's no road to it, what good does that do Walmart? They're going to need to build a road to have people come to their store. People can band together and build them. The same way people band together and pay the cost of an office building by renting out office blocks in it. It's not complicated. I don't understand why it's difficult for people to imagine. And as I said, there's already tons of private roads. In Europe, where the government owns everything, most of the roads are private and run with tolls. Like the Autobahn, the famous German speedway, that's a private road, or at least portions of it are private. And I think that I don't know why people can't understand that since there are already private roads, it wouldn't be difficult to extend that to the entire country.
Yeah, Logan, it reminds me of, you know, kind of like the tax reform stance. I'm sorry. Yeah, actually, yeah, it was part of our tax reform stance with the Austin Peterson campaign when he was running for the Libertarian Party nomination. One of the biggest things that he kind of pushed out was, you know, people kept asking, well, how are you going to fund public infrastructure? And his approach was the exact same thing that George Washington did. What he had was he had a state-sponsored lottery, and all the proceeds from the lottery went to go build roads. Apart from that, like you said, businesses build roads. And it comes back to what we mentioned even earlier in the show. If an idea is good, then people will voluntarily come together without being forced to. I mean, you want to talk about ways to bring the country together? I'm telling you, folks, just saying, oh, we are one people. Oh, we just need to have an honest conversation. No, nothing forces people who have completely different lives to come together more so than having to fix a common problem. And maybe, just maybe, Logan, call me a little bit radical if you want, but maybe if we, and this is, you know, I'm joking, folks, but maybe if we just tore up all the roads we had in our country and just told the American people, hey, you gotta fix this, think how many people would come together and try and fix it. We'd have Black Panthers working with Klansmen to build roads. We'd have people in the Midwest working with people from socialist California to build roads. I mean, just little things like that, because it just makes sense. It's voluntary, it's peaceful, and it didn't require any type of theft.
Yeah, and if you look at all the community services that people think won't happen without government, there's historical examples of all of them that happened without government. Fire departments used to be private. London didn't used to have private police until like the mid-19th century. They were all, I mean, didn't used to have public police. They had private police before that. Like, there's a million examples of these things where if there's a problem that needs to be solved, people will come together and solve it voluntarily. And the idea that you have to force people is crazy. Someone was, I can't remember who gave this example, but someone gave this example of if you had lived in a country where the government had made shoes, the government had allocated all the shoes your entire life, it would be difficult for you to imagine a system in which anyone can just make any shoes they want. You'd have all these questions like, well, how are they going to know what sizes to make? How are they going to know what styles to make? Are they going to measure everyone's feet in the country? How that's impossible. It couldn't be allocated without the government. But like, clearly it works very simply and very easily. And I think maybe it is a bit of a leap of faith, but that sort of thing will happen with other services as well. But people can't imagine it because they've just never seen it with their own eyes.
Exactly. My favorite economist, Milton Friedman, once said, and you probably know this, if the government were in charge of managing all the sand in the Sahara, they would run out of sand.
Yes, of course.
Logan, to wrap things up, as we talk about, and the overarching theme of this is voluntary cooperation and, peaceful interaction of people. What's the biggest thing you want them to go home with in understanding that we can solve more together than we can without having to steal or hurt one another or get things done?
Well, I was at the inauguration a couple days ago, and there's different groups of people. There's people who are protesting peacefully and doing their American duty with following the First Amendment, which is fine. And then there are people breaking windows and setting cars on fire, which is not fine. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for people to work together and have honest conversations. And we may disagree on some things, but I think we share the same basic values. But the people who resort to violence and who are trying to tear down things just for the sake of tearing them down, they're never going to solve anything. They just make things worse for the rest of us. So the thing I'd like people to come together on is just, slow down. Let's try to listen to each other. Let's try to hear each other's point of view, and let's not break each other's stuff. Let's don't hurt people and don't take their stuff. Boom.
Logan, if people want to get in touch with you, learn more about Conservative Review and Free the People, how can they do so?
Well, I'd recommend going to our website at www.freethepeople.org. You can reach me through there. I also write regularly at Conservative Review. That's at conservativereview.com.
Perfect. Logan Albright from both those fantastic organizations, thank you so much for coming on the show, man. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. I'm always happy to be here.
Perfect. Folks, you heard the man. Taxation is theft. Yes, conservatives, taxation is theft. I can say it 13 million ways, but somebody's still going to argue with me. And here's the thing. Like we touched on so many times, you can argue with me about how things will get done. You can argue with me about how we're going to come together and accomplish a certain goal. But I can't find any opposition to this. And usually most people will say, well, this is just my opinion. No, this is grounded in fact. Violence for violence sake will only breed more violence. And what you put in the ground, you should be able to take out and keep. What you go ahead and put into the world, you should have complete rule over. And that if something is good, it does not require force to get it done. These ideas are simple, but these ideas are true. Most importantly, these ideas are peaceful. And what's one peaceful thing you could do? Well, I don't know. I might just be bragging here, but I think you should go ahead and share the show with your friends. Have people listen to this conversation with Logan. And you can find us on Facebook and Twitter. You can go back to our website, rumsorepublic.com, and go ahead and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode. We're on iTunes, Google, Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn. We're on Liberty.me Studio, Player FM. We're everywhere, so there's no excuse that you shouldn't be able to find us on your favorite platform of choice. As always, I'm Remso W. Martinez. Taxation is theft, America. Good night.
Stay connected to Liberty's Rabble Rouser on Facebook and Twitter to stay up to date with the latest episodes, blogs, and other available content. What are you waiting for?